Few people realize that the career that took Ohio native Neil Armstrong
That's one small step for man,
to the moon
one giant leap for mankind.
was launched right here in Cleveland.
We can claim Neil Armstrong as our own. His very first job with NASA was here.
It was at what is now NASA Glenn. In earlier days, this was the Lewis Laboratory, part of the NACA, the predecessor to NASA. A Korean fighter pilot fresh out of Purdue University in the 1950s, Armstrong had applied to be an NACA test pilot in California, but there wasn't a job there.
Unbeknownst to me, they had transferred my application to the other NACA laboratories, and it was as a result of that the Lewis Laboratory talked to me about coming up there, and it was the lowest paying job that I was offered coming out of college, but I think in retrospect it was the right one.
Armstrong lived on Fair Street in Berea for a portion of the several months he was at Lewis. He tested anti-icing equipment on planes by searching out the harshest of our Cleveland winter conditions.
We would fly out in the worst weather we could find out over Lake Erie and try to pick up a lot of ice and then find out which were the most efficient ways of shedding it.
Neil Armstrong got his pilot's license before his driver's license.
In his hometown of Wapakoneta, Ohio, about 3 hours southwest of Cleveland, they have memorialized Neil Armstrong with his own Air and Space Museum. Inside is the first plane he ever flew. Not far away is the home he lived in when he learned to fly. Wapakoneta is classic small-town America.
Well, it's always striking to us that he's from here.
Neil's father worked for the Ohio Auditor's Office. His mother was a beloved Sunday school teacher in town. Around his school day, Neil worked a lot, mostly at the local drugstore.
He would go in before school, sweep the floors, and then go in after school. He'd earn about 40 cents an hour in order to pay for his $9 an hour flight lessons.
Probably the smartest person I've ever met in my entire life.
John Zwez managed the Armstrong Museum for more than 30 years.
When I had a chance to talk with him one-on-one, it's just like you and I talking. You know, he was very friendly, very personable.
Neil Armstrong was something of a reluctant hero, a man who was as humble as he was famous. Indeed, when you first step inside his hometown museum, you are struck by the fact that you see pictures of all of Ohio's astronauts. Neil's sister June told us he didn't even want the museum named for him.
That was a big thing, and he didn't want to name the Armstrong Museum ever. He said there were too many names, too many people involved that were in the space program, particularly the astronauts.
We spoke to June in front of the farm that's just outside of Wapakoneta that's still in the Armstrong family today. Neil was born here, and his sister says her brother would want all the attention surrounding the 50th anniversary of the moon landing spread around, just as he wanted the museum named for astronauts beyond himself.
Hopefully to the Ohio astronauts. That's what I would say Neil was in favor of.
The museum is certainly inspiring.
One of them wants to be an astronaut now.
Brad and Alba Halsher brought their 3 children here, hoping they walk away with a new appreciation.
Just a respect for what it takes to actually put a person in space, let alone the moon.
One of the highlights of the museum is the Gemini 8 space capsule that Armstrong flew into orbit in 1966 until a stuck thruster threw the capsule into a severe spin.
Neil's quick thinking, his good piloting, his engineering mind was able to assess a situation and figure out a way to quickly come out of that spin to save the capsule and the lives of him and his fellow astronaut, Dave Scott.
2 years later, a year before his moon landing, Armstrong was in a training vehicle that gyrated as it plummeted, Armstrong ejecting just in time, then floating to safety. All of which helped prepare Neil Armstrong for what he and fellow astronaut Buzz Aldrin faced as they tried to land Apollo 11 on the moon, with less than a minute of usable fuel left.
Neil and Buzz both looked out their windows and saw boulders. Now, when I say boulders, I don't mean rocks that you could sit on. I mean car-sized boulders.
An overwhelmed computer aboard their lunar module nicknamed the Eagle had alarms going off, and the choice to abort their landing or not was now only about 30 seconds away.
So Neil actually had to take manual control. He actually translated about 1,000 feet further downrange.
In mission control, no one knew what was happening until Neil Armstrong spoke what became his second most famous line.
Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again.
Under pressure, Neil Armstrong was beyond cool, but he also had quite the sense of humor, such as when he heard that North Carolina had put first in flight on its license plates because the Wright brothers from Dayton, Ohio, had traveled to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina to test and prove that man could fly.
Being from Wapakoneta, Ohio, and the Wright brothers' connection to Ohio and so forth, and he said, yeah, North Carolina provided the air, we provided the brains.
And as cool as he was, Armstrong could still feel pressure, as he did while here in Cleveland. Over what?
So when you prepared something for publication, you had to face the Inquisition.
Armstrong described the Inquisition as expert lady English teachers and librarians in Cleveland,
who were absolutely, unbearably critical of a tiniest punctuation or grammatical error. And that's what NASA needs today. The rigor of the language was, which I never mastered, but I appreciated after being exposed to those charming ladies who were so tough.
Neil Armstrong was certainly tough, but he was so much more than that. Fearless and humble, a man who respected intelligence and sought it out. He is unique forever, the first man on the moon. But he is also reflective of the best of Ohio and of America. His life's journey took him where no man had gone before, and in a sense, he took all of us along with him. Bill Sheil, Fox 8 News.